If you've been to college, you know that professor is always correct. But that's only until about 5 years after you get out of school, when you realize that a lot of what they taught you came out of a book. Another way to say they were wrong. Well, here are 5 things that I believe you need to understand about nature that college won't teach you, that will benefit you in life, because understanding how nature truly works will affect how you vote. It will affect what companies you support with your dollars throughout your life. So if you are in college now, have been in college, or are thinking about going into college or skipping college altogether, this video is for you. The first thing college teaches you that is a complete myth is that nature stays exactly the same all the time for millions of years unless humans or cattle destroy it. So here's a discussion I had in DePuyer, Montana with Mike Briggs, the manager of the Boone and Crockett Ranch, about how nature really works and changes drastically all of a sudden and then heals from that drastic change, which will completely turn on its head the myth that everything stays the same until man comes along. The creek was this wide from here to probably what, that little tree over there?
Oh no, not even that far. Like that branch.
Oh,
that dead branch.
Dead branch that's laying right there. That's how wide this was, and it came around that. You can see where the channel is.
We had an incredibly high snowpack in the mountains, and we had 3 days of warm rain.
Okay.
And all that snow just busted loose, plus all the rain, and it there was like these root balls, like here, those trees used to grow like up there, way upstream. They were just rolling down. It looked like the Missouri River was going through and it just roared.
I'll bet. So, yeah. And in one night, this went from that wide, right there, to way over there, which is 150 yards over there.
So that rock that's right there, that's one of those rocks that they hauled in before the floods.
That great big rock, right?
To shore up this bank to try and protect the bank from erosion.
Oh, okay.
And that's the only one that's left there. We actually found most of them down there where that other bend is, where the big bank is.
Okay, way down by
and we hauled them back up and put them underneath where we drive now to create a little bit harder bed where we drive.
Mm-hmm. Well, we just saw an example of what water does, natural water does, right?
And this is the key to understanding. That was one night.
It was one night, yes.
Right. Now, this has been grazed for well over 100 years, and you can't even see the stream.
Yeah, cattle have been in here and every year grazing this. You can see the water down in there. Now, how degraded or degraded is this bank here?
And it's 100 yards from where that catastrophic erosion event happened naturally. And that would have happened whether there's ever been a cow on this landscape or never was a cow on this landscape. Those banks looked just like this before that major amount of water. The reason why this doesn't look like that and that does is this is a water source out of a very small, short drainage.
So it's more controlled water.
Yeah, that's water coming out of the Bob Marshall. A massive
drainage.
Lots of
drainages all flowing into
converge into one as they come out of those mountains, and it's just going down through this one channel right here.
Mountains up there.
Yeah. All the root balls and dead trees and dead willows that are in that stream bed where we just showed that erosion, that creek looked like this, just a bigger creek. You know, that they had healthy creek banks too.
Until it flooded.
Until it flooded. With that amount of water coming at that velocity, it's one short period of time, the big events, like the 64 flood.
Or what just happened 2 years ago or last year in Yellowstone.
Exactly, yeah.
It washed out the highway and everything, houses going down the stream.
Yeah, and so that's the way erosion really works in the real world. It isn't this slow thing that they keep talking about, over hundreds of years or thousands of years or whatever. It's usually one big major catastrophic event.
And then it slowly heals up from that over
like
tens of hundreds of years.
Yeah, it'll eventually come.
100 years.
It'll never be the same.
No.
And I'll take you up and I'll show you a place where there's teepee rings, and we'll go look at some teepee rings that used to be on the creek bank. And now there's no water that flows anywhere remotely close to that because the creek channel has changed over the past however many years.
Right.
You know, and I'll show you there's some big teepee rings from the horse era when the natives had horses, and there's small teepee rings back when they were packing everything up and dragging them on the backs of dogs. You know, so that creek was there for a long time, and now it's no longer there. It's changed.
The next thing that I hear people learn in college, and basically outside of college, that is complete myth, is that more trees is always better in nature. It creates more water, it creates more air, it creates everything that's good and does no damage. But that is simply a myth. There are many different kinds of ground. There is rainforest, there is high desert, there's grassland, savanna, and all of those are completely different when it comes to trees. So take a listen to what we're talking about and what they're doing on the Boone and Crockett Ranch with the amount of trees that they have and what's called conifer encroachment.
You're going to hear more and more in the coming years about, in conservation work, conifer encroachment, where conifers go outside of their normal boundaries and they're taking over grasslands, and that's a lot of what we want to knock that back too. And we have old historical photographs from the 1950s that we can overlay with current satellite images, and we can tell, you know, in the last 70 years what the encroachment is. And so we want to,
which is quite a bit.
Yeah, so we want to take out all those trees. You can see the scattered trees that are outside the deep pockets. We want to take out most all of those. We don't want to do away with any of the trees. The idea is that we have more trees that are healthy.
Right.
The trees that we have now are not healthy because there's not enough water, there's not enough resource to grow that many trees. And so we would rather have fewer trees but much healthier trees. Right now, these trees, even on good years, are in a state of stress like they would be in drought. And if you get up close to the pine trees, you'll see what it looks like blight. But all the foresters I brought up here to look at it, they said, no, that's not actual blight. That's actually just drought caused. They're just not getting enough water. The tips of their needles are turning orange. And most of the foresters I've had that have talked to me, they talk about it in a much more educated fashion, but the basic idea is there's not enough water in the soil to water that many plants. You know, just like if you had a greenhouse and you have it full of plants, it's going to take a certain amount of water, and if you don't supply that certain amount of water, then all the plants are going to suffer. Or if that's all the water you have and you just reduce the number of plants, then those plants can thrive.
Right.
Maybe not a whole greenhouse full.
Right. But some of them.
Some of them can thrive. But if you try to have too many plants, they can't thrive. And now the grass, it's just going to take the water out of this much on the surface. Where a tree, especially a pine tree with deep roots, it's going to take a lot of water.
A lot of water. And they put a lot of water out through their needles.
Right, and so a lot of these little tributaries that used to run water, they no longer run water.
Because of all the trees.
Yeah, and
we weren't used to be there, but now they are.
Not anymore. My theory is if we can thin all those pine trees up there, and then really knock back these quake and aspen, and then that'll create these shoots, these starts, you know. Then the elk could come in and they would browse those. These trees are too big and too mature. The elk no longer browse those. The moose will come in and browse, but we get 2 or 3 moose where we can get like 400 head of elk, and that would keep the quake and aspen there, but not let it grow so thick and so out of control that it sucks up all the water out of all the drainages.
Right. And then those aspen trees suck up such an enormous amount of water that they can actually dry out
The creek.
The whole creek. They can, and you can see they're choking the head of that all the way down. So they don't go very deep. Their roots are pretty shallow, and they suck up an enormous amount of water per tree. Number 3 is that in college and life, right now we're going through a time period when everybody talks about efficiency. Efficiency in business, efficiency in water, efficiency in everything that we do. But that can lead to major problems if you're only focused on efficiency. Water cycles work like this. The ocean evaporates, forms into clouds over land, drops snow and rain. In the Rocky Mountains, there's tons and tons of snow that drop on the tops of the mountains. That melts mostly in the spring, and it goes down the creeks into the rivers out to the Gulf of Mexico. If you're on the east side of the divide, out to the coast of California and Oregon if you're on the west side of the divide. So this snow comes out very quickly, which causes the erosion we were talking about in the first point. If we were to let all the flow of the runoff, the snow melt, run through our area as quickly as possible without stopping or slowing it down, what would happen is all the water would just flow right through. And then in like July, August, and September, all the people downstream would be crying for water because there is none. It all went out the coast. The rivers just raise really high, go out the coast, then they drop back down, and then you have no water reserves coming later. So the old timers were really smart about this, and nature is really smart about this, which affects beavers and wolves together. I think you'll find this very interesting. In the world of efficiency, the best idea would be to use the least amount of water possible. Now listen to the conversation.
And my old granddad used to always say, when we were talking about irrigation, he said, you can't keep the water from going to the Gulf of Mexico. What we do is we just spread it out and slow it down. So every chance you can get, you just take it to a new place, spread it out and slow it. Move it slow. It'll eventually seep out. And see, just right down here, we used to hay all that. And it's just going through the ground, and it's coming up. And from here to where the willows are, that all just gets kind of saturated from underneath. You won't see it going across the top of the ground. It's coming from underneath because it's just leaking underneath.
It's just barely flowing. Now, one of the things about this is you can actually stop the water from going to the Gulf of Mexico. And a lot of that, I believe, is what we're doing right now, is if you fling it in the air.
Yeah, if it goes through a sprinkler.
If you have irrigation and you fling it in the air, a lot of that, like a massive amount of that, is actually being evaporated into the air, which if you're...
And even what isn't at the flow rate that it's actually going to go back into the water table. It's going down like 2 inches into the ground.
Yes.
Then it's going back up through the plants. Yeah, it never has a positive effect on charging ground tables.
And I think that's a very important point. So when you're seeping water like this, it's going through the ground, watering all that grass, going back down into the soil, which charges whatever water is underneath the ground here, which all water, groundwater is water underneath the ground. That's where well water comes from. When you drill a well somewhere, you're hitting water under the ground. So massive amounts of water underneath most ground. That's where, like when we talk about the Ogallala Aquifer, talking about a vast area across Kansas where underneath the ground there's a reservoir of water. Well, this water right here will go into the ground, back down, follow the strata, and end up in aquifers like the Ogallala Aquifer. I can't even say Ogallala. But if you sprinkle it into the air, especially with like a wind blowing like was right now, then most of that is going to evaporate. The rest of it's going to go on the ground, and they do that in the name of efficiency. They water the ground just the top. Because they're just trying to grow. Water costs money out of a sprinkler, so they're trying to just grow crops. So they just want the crop roots wet. They don't need it down 3 feet. They think that's wasting water when you're irrigating farmland. So doing this actually goes back into that underground system, but when you're trying to be efficient, it's all going into the air. You're utilizing for some plants, and that's it. To me, this is the same thing as how money works in small communities versus big corporations.
Because direct parallel.
A direct parallel. Because what happens is we all talk about efficiency right now for climate change. Everybody wants everything to be so efficient. And what they're actually talking about is that all the money is siphoned up to a few individuals at the top and doesn't stay in the community, just like this water stays here. Actually, an inefficient system is more efficient.
in many, many ways. Because if you're inefficient, meaning you have a ton of these little businesses all around community areas spread out all over the West, then a lot of that money, instead of being funneled right up in an efficient way to the top
It's distributed to everybody.
it's distributed all over the place because people are working, they're making money, they're making profit, and then that profit turns over in those communities 4 or 5 times, and some of that money does go up to the bigger corporations because of what you can't supply. But if you don't utilize it here, what we're doing is we're making it more and more efficient. All the water is just leaving and the money is just leaving immediately to corporations and making people billionaires.
Right.
But the communities, the systems that we see are
drying
dying.
up and dying.
They're just dying.
Yeah.
They're drying up. People can have, I have a job, which is great at Walmart, but most of that money
Leaves the community.
it goes right out of the country, to make the Walton family even richer than they already are, with $500 billion of profit in 1 year. That's exactly what's happening here.
Yeah.
We've become a society of trying to make things efficient with one goal in mind, instead of remembering that inefficiency can actually benefit.
Right.
And the beavers did the same thing. Before the trapping era in the early 1800s, all these drainages, and we saw beavers. We'll take you up and show you a bunch of beaver action. But the beavers would have naturally held that water up, and it would have come out relatively slowly. Now we trap the beaver out. Now, then come along the homesteaders and the early day ranchers and things like that, needing to grow wild hay after the winter of 87, then they fill the role that the beaver did before. They slow that water up. They hold that water up in the mountains as long as they can, and it keeps all these aquifers healthy and full and vibrant, and it creates a lot of wildlife habitat, like right there. See those birds?
Yeah.
They're headed for that hillside that's just recently been irrigated.
Oh yeah. You can see the brighter green.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and so not only do you do that and you're saving the water, but you're also increasing the growth of the grass.
Oh yeah.
Increasing the health of the soil because you're watering it, and you benefit from the water.
The birds, the wildlife, everything benefits. The sandpipers are awesome out here. The sandhill cranes, the seagulls, the little cowbirds.
So you can see this soil is kind of damp. That's amazing how it seeps underneath there. You can see the green coming off of that right over there, and kind of see a line where that's seeping through there. So that doesn't evaporate because it's going underneath, kind of underneath the soil.
Soil protects it from the wind and the temperatures.
Doesn't suck it out into the air. And also the beavers, very interestingly, have had a huge effect on the willows, which were blamed on the elk, which is why we introduced wolves to, one of the major reasons they introduced wolves to Yellowstone back in the 90s was because all the willows were gone. And I'll tell you kind of why that was when we get up here to these beavers. One of the reasons that wolves were actually introduced to Yellowstone was because the willows along the streams in Yellowstone were dying. So here's what was presumed, is that the massive herds of elk, because it was a home to one of the largest elk herds in the world, 19,000 elk. And they were overgrazing certain areas of the park, so they thought, well, that's why all these willows are gone. And then when they put the wolves in there, I guess the thought was, you kill enough of the elk, they didn't say it this way, but you destroy enough of the elk, you will have willows come back and you won't have this overgrazing problem. So that's why they put wolves in there, is to kill a bunch of elk. Well, they did that. They killed the herd down from 19,000 to 3,000 in about, 15 years or something?
Yeah, about that.
And nothing changed with the willows. So this continuation study, you can see it, it's a study, I believe it was in either coordination with, or it was actually the University of Colorado that's conducting this. And in that study, they started replicating beaver dams on the streams. And what happened was this.
is when you put beaver dams across the streams, you started sub-irrigating all out in these areas like this, and you brought back all the willows. So what actually was happening, most likely, is that the beavers were taken out of Yellowstone Park, which was causing the destruction of, or the non-growth.
Long before it was a park.
Huh?
Long before it was a park.
Long before it was a park, the beavers were gone. So then you weren't sub-irrigating any of the ground along those streams and rivers. So he's letting some water down.
So this makes it go down the ditch.
Okay.
So I'm drying the ditch up.
Well, oh, he's turning the ditch off.
Yeah, so I was letting a small amount continue in the creek before.
I see.
Keep the creek going.
Yep.
But taking the bulk of it out my ditch for
going out
10
here
days.
and then draining down into
Now
the ditch.
100% of it's just going to go back in the creek channel.
Gotcha. So that's when they discovered this. So that was one thing that I found was very interesting. When I went back east after they reintroduced the wolves, everybody was happy because the wolves are back and it's saving the willows. But that wasn't even the problem in the first place, and it didn't help the willows. If you go on to the, and you'll see this all over the internet about how they're saving the willows. Just go on to the actual people who did the 20-year study, who are pro-wolf, by the way. It's not like they're anti-wolf, they're pro-wolf. And they still say that when the wolves came into Colorado, that you won't see any impact to any ecosystems because there isn't any damage in those ecosystems. There was damage to Yellowstone's, and that didn't even fix that because it was the wrong animal. You were trying to fix the wrong problem. They needed sub-irrigation by beavers.
Right.
And so when they did that, the willows started coming back. So we just messed up an entire ecosystem for absolutely no reason, is what I'm saying.
We're really good at that.
Yeah. These are all willows right there, growing all through this whole area. Now, if you have this happen in a flatter area, it would do the same thing. It's going to sub-irrigate all the way out and way up there because they're backing up the water, and then it's going out underneath the ground and watering these trees and the willows all around it. So that's what happened in Yellowstone, and that's what naturally these beavers are doing something similar to what he's doing with what Mike's doing with his water. Now, people with our modern technology, we think we can do these things more efficiently, and in the name of efficiency, water efficiency, what happens is we stop losing the water into the ground and recharging our aquifers and our underground water systems, and it's all going in the air. And you can see the water backed up down there too, so there's another dam. It's all through there. You can see the new willows and stuff coming up on the bank over there. So when you look at an ecosystem, you got to remember that sometimes we don't know what's best. So all this stuff, they throw in a lot of emotion to get you to vote for putting a bunch of wolves in there to kill all the elk out because it's going to save the willows, which I didn't understand anyway. But when you find out that it wasn't actually that in the first place, it was all sold on emotion, and emotion gets you in trouble. Number 4 is something that's a little bit more specific. What's being taught, and all through college, I don't know if this is specifically taught, but the general idea is that cattle are bad for the environment. You know, methane in the air, they're farting, they're burping, ruining climate change, but buffalo are good. So is that the truth? Can it be both of them, or only buffalo and not cattle? And what is the real answer, and what are the reasons why they would be good or bad? Well, let's take a look. People think that cows have such a massive impact on erosion or destroying stream banks or whatever, and yet they forget that thousands of buffalo ran around here all the time. You can imagine 1,000 buffalo going through that creek at the same time. You know, it did a lot of damage. And so you were saying
Charlie Goodnight, if you read his memoirs, in the mid 1800s, he was in the West, and he was riding a mule, and he came across the path of a buffalo herd, and it was so massive and so wide that he thought his mule was going to starve to death before he got to the other side.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, they say
because there was no grass left at all.
Right. They would just trample and eat and trample all of it, and there would be herds of like that would pass in front of people they've written about for 3 days.
Yeah.
You got 100,000 buffalo running past you day after day after
and
day
every
for
creek
3 days.
they came to, they
went through the same spot.
Yeah, same
for
spot.
a mile wide.
And they disturbed those banks, and yet somehow we're still intact enough to be worried about it today.
Right.
Yeah.
So what our point is that having cattle on something, look at this landscape. This is the landscape left behind by cattle, right here. I mean, wow, this looks awful, doesn't it? Doesn't it look terrible? Well, when do you use this grass then?
Different time every year.
Different time every year.
Graze this the very last pasture. So as soon as these meadows really come up, I'll get cattle in here and graze this, and let other pastures that I need to rest longer, I'll give them an opportunity to grow to the end of the season. So we're always rotating. We just try to never graze at the same time, the same way every year.
This is similar to how like wild buffalo herds would use something. It lets different kinds of grasses grow. So if you graze off of pasture the same time every year, well, you put your cows in this pasture and you put them in that pasture and this pasture and this pasture, and you do that same time every year, the new grass that's growing at that certain time of year, you're grazing it off right away every single year. Whereas what he's doing is he's like, this is the grass we used last year. So there's different grasses that were eaten off. Now he's going to graze it off first or early.
So that's what I'm after. I'm after the seed head.
Yes.
I want, on pastures that I grazed too soon last year, I want a seed head to mature and the seed become viable. So when the cattle go in and they graze that, it either goes through their digestive system out in the manure, which fertilizes it, and then you need compaction. So you need the hoof, the cattle stepping on those seeds that are on the ground. Whether it just shakes off, the seeds just shake off while they're grazing, because
they're knocking it off when they walk by.
They're knocking it off when all those seeds are going to be hitting the ground, and the cattle are going to fertilize it, urinate on it, and then they're going to get that compaction by stepping on that seed. It increases the likelihood. Now, not every seed in that blade of grass is going to produce another blade of grass.
Right.
But look how many there are in that blade of grass. A few of them are going to plant, and that's going to regenerate. And what I'm looking for as a producer is the spatial density between blades of grass, blades of cover for the ground. And so these areas where we can irrigate, it's really dense. There's no open space that you can see to the ground.
Yeah.
Later on, I'm going to take you up on places where we can't irrigate, and it's really rocky and the soil's poor, and that becomes a really big deal because it's a long ways between each blade of grass.
Right.
And that's the theory behind intensive grazing rotation, is that you go in, hit it really hard, knock the seed's head off, put a bunch of manure and urine and everything that the seed needs, and then when a little bit of moisture hits that ground, that will create a plant, and they'll, instead of having one plant that created one seed head, now let's hope we have 3 or 4. And that
every year it just
that decreases the space between the plants until you have something like this.
Right.
That's the theory. It doesn't always work in the West like it does in the textbooks at college, but to one degree or another it works.
It works, and one of the essential parts to that, like we were talking about yesterday, is that first grazer, right?
Right.
Either cow or buffalo. So people think all the time we should remove cows from public land. The problem is cows are not replaceable on much of public ground as an ecosystem producer, because without the cattle there, elk stop using the ground. The ecosystem changes, the grass changes, and the elk don't like it, the deer don't like it, the bird life starts leaving.
There's a sequence of grazers that utilize the natural resource, the grass, and it has to start with a buffalo or a cow. And if you take that out, those primary grazers, those first ones, then everything else doesn't graze as well. Case in point, a buffalo and a cow only have one row of teeth. They don't have teeth on the top and the bottom, they just have teeth on the bottom. So they can't graze that grass off to the nubbins. very easily. It's really hard for them to do that. They really have to work at it. But they can go by on those tall blades of grass, scoop it in with their tongue, pull it off, and they'll leave typically like that much. That creates a traumatic event in the life of the plant that tells the roots, we got to get going. We got to get another seed head up that starts to grow again. And that regrowth is softer and lusher and more desirable for a deer, an elk, an antelope, all the secondary grazers. And this cycle goes all the way from a cow all the way down to the microorganisms that are in the plants or that are in the soil that help the roots grow. But if you take the primary grazer out, you really screw the whole system up. You can take one of the species in the middle out, as long as there's something that is compatible or comparable, and that'll replace that. But you can't fix it if you take the first one out of the equation.
Because it doesn't start. So what happens is those
The whole
old
process
blades of
doesn't
grass
start.
just get old, and they don't ever send out other shoots and everything. They fall over and create a mat of then carbon material laying on top of the soil,
ground,
which seals off the soil.
Year after year, that
Year after
becomes
year, it just
very
packs down.
detrimental.
And it starts killing off, and you'll get sparser and sparser and sparser grass instead of thicker and thicker and thicker.
Because those seed heads have a harder and harder time getting to the actual soil, and then they have a harder and harder time working their way back from the soil. If they do get to the soil, working their way back up through all that dense matter. And so when you take that primary grazer out of the equation, and then the deer and elk will automatically remove themselves from the equation.
Because they don't like the heavy old grasses that buffalo and cattle eat. So
you remember when I was talking to you about the that elk ranch I used to run? That's a confined situation where elk cannot leave. They have to eat what is there. If you let grass get about this tall and start to head out, those elk would dang near starve themselves to death before they would eat that. They would just pace the fence and pace the fence and pace the fence. But if you would go in with a mowing machine and just cut that grass in half or cut it off close to the ground, instantly their heads would go down, they would start to graze it. And they would utilize those plants then. And that's in a controlled environment where the elk don't have a choice. They would almost rather starve than to eat that old rank coarse grass. Now I could have done the same thing if I'd had a herd of cows. I didn't on that ranch, but if I had a herd of cows, I could have sent that herd of cows in there and they could have mowed it. Only when they mowed it, they would have fertilized it, and they would have planted seeds as they were doing it.
And they poke holes in that crust, and they disturb the soil, and so it's got so many more benefits. That's why they.
Then the elk would have went in right behind them, and they would have benefited, just as, probably more so because of the fertilizer effect, than the mowing machine. But it's so hard to get that into the mentality of people that are outside of our world, our natural world that we work and live in every day. People think that if a cow eats the grass, then the deer don't have the grass to eat. And which actually, it's the opposite. Unless the cow or the buffalo work just fine. If they eat it and get that top off and we get that regrowth, then the elk. I can almost predict where the elk will be in the fall on my ranch based on how I graze it.
Sometimes natural things that you see in nature are blamed on cattle or some kind of overgrazing by ranchers. But here's an example of something that's very natural that looks really bad.
Where the grass doesn't grow right here, that's bentonite. That's a natural bentonite, and we have a lot of that. Well, I call it's just clay. You could actually make clay pots out of some of this.
Like this. This is bentonite,
Yeah, and it's useful in some places, like we get a big blowout on a big canal, or we get a place where it's seeping too much, like over a rocky ridge, where a canal goes over a rocky ridge. We can line that with this.
People use it to line ponds with.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't let the water go through it.
Yeah, and you can see how that's acting. Like on this part of the ditch, no water is going out. So, see, that's dry out there.
See the line of where the bentonite is, it's just not going to grow there. It's a type of soil that is a natural type of soil that is not going to allow hardly anything to grow in it naturally.
It can't be aerated. Roots have to have air in order to function.
I see.
And the fifth one is that everything worked everything in nature worked in perfect harmony, the utopian thought process before man came along. So 150 years ago, everything was perfect. Wolves laid down beside sheep. Oh no, that wasn't really out because there wasn't any sheep over here. So wolves laid down beside baby elk, and everything worked like the Garden of Eden 150 years ago before humans messed it all up.
It did help a little bit on the massive overgrazing that they were doing in Yellowstone.
Yeah,
though.
well,
the overgrazing there. If I did that on my ranch,
oh, yeah.
I would go to jail.
Exactly.
Yeah, they would. I would be the worst guy and the villain in the country. But
it
in a
didn't
national park, they could do it. Yeah.
It didn't actually save any overgrazing because what happened was when the elk population dropped, the buffalo population spiked. So now we have just as much grazing going on in national park, and the reason that is because we don't have humans regulating the population of animals. Back, and you will say, well, humans weren't doing it 200 years ago. Yes, we were. There was millions of Indians across the plains, all the way from Canada and in Canada, all the way down to Mexico.
They primarily ate buffalo.
That primarily ate buffalo. They estimated. I read in a newspaper article that that was in Texas in 1870 that they estimated the amount of buffalo that were killed by Indians every year was 1.7 million at that time across the West. Well, if you don't think that's having an impact on the population of buffalo, 1.7 million buffalo, that's a ton. So anyway, so humans do have an effect, but you have to use practical sense and actual science instead of just emotion and trying to look at one element. You got to look at the whole ecosystem, not just one thing. What you call this, the North Trail?
The Old North Trail.
The Old
this
North
is
Trail.
Registered on the historical landmarks. Is one of the historical landmarks. This trail, we don't even know how old it is. The Native Americans used it to go up and down the Rocky Mountain front, and they used it. This area for two reasons. They have a lot of natural hiding places from their enemies, but they also were able to traverse the creeks a lot easier. You know, these little creeks, they can just wade right through and go right through, where if you get out by like Great Falls and you got to try and traverse the Missouri or the Marias, that's a much bigger challenge.
Yeah, you get further away from the mountains, they get bigger and deeper, so it's harder.
Yeah.
So you can see the grooves going right there. I wonder if you can see that. Right there. That's the trail's right here. That trail is what he's talking about. That's the Travoy Trail.
Where they are old Travoys marks.
Travoy
I'll take
marks.
you up and show you where they're a little bit more easy to see.
Travoys are two poles that they would tie to a horse and drag and like angle back and then tie all their stuff onto it, and then it would drag that
Like a
those
sled.
two poles like a sled. So they're gonna cause, you know, some drag marks.
So right up here, it's gonna be really obvious where the trail is.
Oh yeah? Oh yeah. Yes it is. Wow.
I'll take you up. So the people from Shoto got permission from the Montana Historical Society or whatever to mark the trail. So it's marked with stones that have the name of the trail.
So this is part of the trail
Yeah,
here.
this is part of the trail here.
Wow. That is a major trail. That's a road.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that was the old road up and down here. Yeah, basically that.
Yeah. Wow. So they mark it with these rocks or what?
Yeah, I'll drag you right up there.
Yeah. So that's the road. The old Travoy Trail. It's in a beautiful spot.
And it goes all through this mountain ground of ours.
Wow.
And that,
Oh yeah, it says Old North Trail right on there. They marked it with these rocks. It says Old North Trail. Wow. The bigger teepee rings are horsehair.
horsehair. When
Okay.
they had the ability to hold more weight.
Yeah. So they could haul a bigger teepee. So you can see the ring here goes around right there. That's
the stones they used to hold down the outside of the teepee, right, to the ground. So the teepee would go up right here. That's a stone ring.
And that's big enough that had to have been during the horse era. And we'll take you and show you some that are smaller that had to have been pre-horse.
Pre-horse, which is
using the same site. The camp.
what's pre-horse? What years? Because the horse didn't show up till 17.
Yeah, probably up in this country.
17 something.
Yeah.
So before 17, see, the horse is not native to North America at all. There was a horse here 1,000 years ago, but it's been extinct for a long time. That Spanish brought horses over. So when somebody says that horses are native, they really aren't. They are not native to North America, just so you know. Fact. So that's what he's talking about is the Indians would come up here and they would use dogs and other sources of transport to move all of their teepees and stuff and their equipment, which means they couldn't haul
Very much
these
weight.
huge teepees like this because the poles and even
the buffalo hide.
hides would be too big. So when they got horses, then they had these larger, were able to carry way more with horses.
Yeah.
So
And they
prairie
basically
smoke, yeah.
that flower, and they basically explode when they blossom. And they have these little tiny tendrils. They're not like a leaf or a petal or anything. And yeah, they're just like a little cute pink puffball. But they haven't exploded.
I see some of them. They're right there.
Yeah, they haven't exploded yet. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. See, look over. See, some of them exploded over there. They're starting to puff out. Yeah, they're.
I'll show you. I like these purple ones too. This is the larkspur.
No, that's lupine.
Lupine, yeah. And then these are what he's talking about, the prairie smoke. And this is what they look like when they flower. They look like that. That's what he's saying about like it'll explode, like a little fuzzy tendril.
There's another teepee ring right there.
Oh yeah. Yep, here's another teepee ring right here. You can see the rocks going around right there. It's incredible to think that that's where this is where they would have set up a camp. So you had teepee ring here, teepee ring over there. It's pretty incredible. We're walking right there right now.
So that's the 5 things that I really believe that if you understand and grasp how they actually work in nature, it will affect how you live the rest of your life. I'm Trinity Van Den Aker. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to this channel because I'm going to have more content about the West. I'm going to go out and move some cattle and ride Calabar, and you get to see the reality of how the West really works. And I hope you enjoy my new type of episode here on Life in the West. Again, thank you for watching. Make sure you go to lifeinthewest.com to join my community there. Until next time, God bless.